We so appreciate you taking a little time to listen and just participate in conversation with us. Welcome to Curiosity, Not Judgment. I'm Birga.
And I'm Gary.
So we have had some interesting conversations over the last number of weeks. There have been all kinds of things happening in the news. There have been all kinds of things happening in the world. And, much of what we address, we don't call out a particular event or a topic necessarily by name, because I think you can fill in the blanks in your own head and heart as you're listening to some of these conversations. But the point to all of this really is, how do we learn to be curious about the world in which we live in order to respond in a different way, to get a different outcome? Because if we continue to operate the way we've always operated and not be curious about how our role impacts others, how our lives impact others, we're stuck. We're perpetually stuck. And so this has been a big news week. And again, I'm not going to call out a particular event, but just whatever week you listen to this, I'm sure it's going to be a big news week, right? Something will have caught your attention. You will have seen or heard something that has elevated your emotion. It's made you glad. It's made you angry. It's made you feelings of helplessness. Fill in the emotion to how you respond to some of these news stories. But I think the greater question that I've been thinking through is, when something hits the news cycle and you have your personal opinion, your personal stance, and you've got a group of folks that agree with you and a group of folks that vehemently disagree with you, how do you allow your mind to go to that place of curiosity to consider the antis, the anti your position? Do they have validity in what they're thinking and how they're responding? How do you make that mental shift?
This is so hard because I think in today's world, there is a growing number of people who believe that the people who disagree with them really have no validity, and maybe even shouldn't be on the planet. I mean, it just has gone that far that if you don't have certain stances, if you have certain thoughts, you're not even entitled to those. You have no standing, you have no credibility as a human being, as a person. And I think that's a very dangerous place to go because, in whose judgment, and again, we're going back to judgment there, when you think you've got all the answers, there's bad outcomes. I was reminded, and I think I related the story earlier or last week to you, about when I was going through my terminal cancer and the different doctors that I went to go see. And I had this diagnosis and I only had a little bit of time to figure out what I was going to do. I was told 6 weeks. And so I went to you. I think I've related this story before on this podcast about, I went to my radiologist and they said, radiation, you had to do it. My oncologist said chemotherapy. My surgeon said, get it out of there. And so, and I've related that part before. What I didn't relate is how helpless and out of control that made me feel. And so no one said, so how are you doing? How are you sleeping? How are you feeling about things? Back then, I'm not sure I could have told them. I didn't have my feel well. But, and then, how much of the treatment plan are you a part of? What outcome are you looking for? No one ever asked those questions. And I think that's kind of how we all are these days. We have a very specific agenda. I am a radiologist, therefore you need radiation. I am passionate about this, therefore I am and I will tell you that each of the doctors said radiation, for instance, is the only way. If you do one of these other things, you will die. And it's like, how is the radiologist telling me this? But then the surgeon saying, if you do radiology, you will die. You must do. We do, this is a story that happened in my life that was very real. But I feel like we do that all the time now. We have an opinion and we say, this is the only way. How is that even a possible thought path to go down? When we know that there's different opinions, Very valid people, very intelligent people have different life experiences which have brought them to this place. Why is that no longer valid?
Well, so I want to go to this example because obviously this really happened to you, and you literally made a choice from one of the three, and you are here to tell the tale.
Mm-hmm.
So 2/3 of those doctors were incorrect in telling you, choose my way or you will die.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that it's because those doctors only studied their own discipline that they came to that conclusion? For example, do you think if the radiologist had studied the same materials the surgeon had studied, would he still have had the same conclusion that radiology is your only option for life?
I think this was the situation. These were not evil people. They're people who are literally trying to help me. But it's an interesting, I think, analogy to what we see going on right now. I think that they all started out with the basic medical degree before they did their specialties. So I think they did have some of that information. But I think it's more along the lines, and it's instructful, that I think I can be helpful because of what I have to offer. The point of the story is I should be asking somebody else what is helpful to them. And then I can either get a different tool out of my backpack to help them, or I can refer them to someone else. Or we as a group could help them in a different way with a different skill set. I guess that's where I was trying to go with that. Because I think that this is the issue, is it's okay to be passionate about what you're doing.
Sure.
But be open that there might be other options or other opinions that are out there that are as valid as yours.
Yeah.
And to just dismiss, it's the contempt prior to investigation. It's the dismissive attitude of, this is the way it is and I'm right and I have truth. I have the way. I think that's where we get in trouble.
If you had a magic wand to wave over that situation from your past and had a different opportunity presented to you, some combination of all of these things and how these doctors interacted with you or possibly with each other, what would that have looked like?
Well, so we did investigate some of that. Some of it was, okay, if we do, let's do a little bit of chemo first, that will shrink the cancer, then we do the surgery. I did look at various combinations of options too. And by the way, it was my radiologist neighbor who over a beer one night finally said, okay, you know what, at your age, your condition, et cetera, I think I'd go surgery. And that was very helpful. And I did go surgery, by the way. I thought that was very helpful in that I did have somebody who finally said, you know what, maybe there is a different path. And there are combinations of paths from different paths that you can sometimes choose too. But I think I wouldn't change a thing, obviously, because I'm here. The thing that I think was very important, and the ones the doctors I was most attracted to were the ones who were open to other ideas. And by the way, the ones who were open to a second opinion. I had a doctor who literally said, I heard you went and got a second opinion. I can no longer be your doctor.
Whoa.
I mean, and again, this is not a criticism of the doctor profession or individual doctors even. There are some people who believe that if I tell you, if you've come to me for advice and I give you advice, you should listen to my advice. And why would you go get somebody else's?
I think this is such an important conversation and such a very real example. And I'm racking my brain thinking about how, you as the patient, how could you have been better served by the experts, the geniuses in their field, having a openness to being curious about what the other positions were and how they could have assisted you in the process of being made well. I again pick a topic of something that is a very passionate subject, and you're going to have experts in those fields, right? And the layperson who's trying to learn, who's trying to understand the news, who's trying to gather the facts, you hear these talking heads and they're completely opposed positions. And again, as you said earlier, this vitriolic hatred almost towards one position over the other, how could we advocate for our experts to have that curious posture so that we can learn and make decisions for ourselves truly based on information and not just a ramrod approach because somebody thinks they're right?
I wish there was an easy answer to that. I wish there was we can always talk about Fox versus CNN, which is a real thing right now for many of us. And that's like, if there was an organization out there that was more balanced, really, not one way or the other, then I would support them with my dollars and my viewership. I think we're in that situation right now where one feels like they have to be this way because the other one's that way.
Yeah.
And all they do is just hurl insults at each other, and it just makes them more and more into the other's camp. And so I don't know the answer to that. I think that same thing is happening with our two-party system right now.
Absolutely.
And I think it's being controlled by the far right and far left as opposed to the majority of people. I used to say majority of people that are in the center. Talk about the silent majority. I think a lot of people are just afraid to talk at all.
Sure.
Because of that very thing we're talking about. Whereas where you are not even valid to talk to anymore. I will not be your friend anymore.
Yeah.
Because you have a different position than mine.
Oh, it's a real threat. Yeah.
And so, that's one of the reasons why on social media, if you follow me, it's all, family and
sunshine and roses.
Events, sunshine and roses and rainbows. Because that's, what else can you do in my mind, getting involved in, Twitter fights is just a ridiculous use of time. It doesn't solve anything, doesn't convince anybody. I think that the issue is how can we, and back to your question, how could I as a patient have been better served? I think that I would turn that around and say, how do I make sure as a consumer of whatever it is that I am served? Mm-hmm. And I think part of that is making sure that you've got people that you're traveling with, trusted advisors. In my case with the cancer, I had an advocate that went to every single thing with me and made sure that they heard the same thing I did. Mm-hmm. And I think without that, especially with something like medical that can literally be life and death, that's really critical. I always tell people I feel really bad for the people who are all by themselves in that situation. Because look, physicians are intimidating and they've got a short amount of time to talk to you. There's not like long philosophical conversations.
Sure.
They are trained to try to diagnose as soon as possible and move on. Mm-hmm. And it's a tough situation to be in when you're trying to make life and death situations from that standpoint. But it's the same thing if I'm trying to interpret the news or I'm trying to interpret a local city council issue or anything else that I'm supposed to be involved with.
Yeah. I was just imagining a presidential debate or a gubernatorial debate, pick one. And I would love to see a moderator pose the question, tell me something that you really appreciate about your opponent's platform.
I think people have tried that in the past. And I think that's something that in your debate prep, you actually get prepared for in case someone's smart enough to ask that question. And then what you do, and fortunately in debate prep, is figure out how to spin that around to your advantage anyway. But wouldn't it be nice, we always say this, but then we tune in and we love to see a fight. It's almost like tuning into a car race and hoping for a wreck. You don't tune in for that. You tune in through usually I usually tune in to see how I should support my candidate more. Right? I hardly ever say, I think I could be convinced here. Right. And so I think part of the problem is us as the viewership. But if a moderator were to ask that and someone would say, I do watch right now for politicians of either party that respond with anger and rage and vitriol and sound bites, and the ones that do thoughtful answers that try to take an approach of, I get how smart people disagree on this. I would say maybe we could compromise and try to do this or this or this or this instead of just going all the way one way or the other.
Oh, goodness. Yeah, I feel like we could open up a whole box of cans of worms over this topic right now. But it does, hopefully, at least for me, it does cause me to really think about, can I be intentional about drawing out some positive points from an opposing view? And can I allow myself to be curious in order to see the humanity in the other side? Because I think so often that is what is missing. We see the opposing viewpoint in whatever it is, and we somehow disconnect the person from it, or associate them as evil, or just can't even hear anything that they're saying, because our brain likes to just pick one thing over another. It doesn't like to kind of dabble into that curious realm.
It's easier
Yeah.
to categorize and say, well, I hate this person, so anything that they say I must be opposed to. I like the ones where the interviewer goes to the person on the street and says, hey, what do you think about this issue? Without saying what their candidate says about it. And then says, oh, by the way, your candidate opposes that. Or, oh, well, then, And I think that it's instructful, because we need to understand that you can get golden nuggets of information from anyone. Anyone.
Yeah.
And I served down at a homeless food center for many, many years. And I was amazed at some of the nuggets I could get from people who were coming through that line, by getting to know them, by talking to them, by afterwards getting my food and not sitting with the other volunteers, but going and sitting among them and listening to the conversations. And listen, if you have the attitude that no matter who's talking, you can get a nugget out of that, think about how different an approach would be. And by the way, think about what you might learn.
Yeah.
If you're sitting in a situation and you're saying everything that comes out of this person's mouth I like, or I'll justify,
Right.
or I'll rationalize, even if I don't think it's the right way to go, and everything that comes out of this person's mouth is wrong and to be hated, well, you're not even useful anymore.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, there will never be a good outcome from that.
Yeah. I don't know if it's, our history. I don't know if it's kind of how we're wired, but I'm guessing that many people just like a yes or a no, a right or a wrong, an on or an off. They want one side to pick and to just feel comfortable, and like, that is the side that I choose, and that's where I'm going to dwell. And as you said, it's definitely easier. And as you bring up serving meals in a homeless shelter, even that topic is so hotly debated. And I can think about conversations I've been part of where it's housing first, and then an opposing view would be sobriety first.
Yes.
Right? And those two things are miles apart.
I've heard these things, yes.
And we like to pick one side over the other, but the complicated truth is, it's probably both and.
Yes, it's always and.
And there's so many people impacted by whatever initiative you choose, that you put forward, and it's not going to be a one size fits all. And that applies to politics. It applies to all kinds of things, because maybe you've got every argument in the world that you can think of for housing first. The reality is, there's somebody in the homelessness community that model is not going to work for. And so, can we back up? Can we be curious? And can we start to investigate what are some of the positive aspects of the opposing point of view?
One of the tenets of curiosity, not judgment, is to diagnose before you prescribe. You don't go to your optometrist and she just hands you her glasses and say, these work for me, wear these. Yeah. We're looking for a diagnosis first. And part of that is we want to be heard. It's like one of the doctors saying, so how are you doing? What is your desired outcome? How much of a part of the treatment plan do you feel like you are? I think those things are so important. And as we are trying to figure out what the best solution for someone is, how many times do we start with, what do you need? What, because we all think we have the solutions. We all think we know, we've analyzed the situation, we've come to our conclusion, and it's easy to say, well, then if this is the right thing for me, or this is the right thing for this one situation, it should apply to everything.
Right.
And that's just not the case. Every people group is different, every person is different, every community is different. This is why it's so important to first try to figure out who the other person is and what they need before we prescribe what we think they need.
Mm-hmm. You know, we've had a couple of different conversations in the business world over the last number of days, and I'm thinking about so many hot button topics. And I had a different conversation that these things all kind of are coming to a head as we're having this discussion today. But when you try to make a stance or form a position for your company, for your region, for your bureaucracy, whatever that looks like, the danger is the bigger that bureaucracy, the bigger that organization, taking that stance, the higher chance that you're going to eliminate a whole lot of people that just don't fit in that funnel. And just yesterday, I had somebody say, what should our response be? And it was for a large group of people. What should our response be? And I said, I don't think our response should be anything. I think this comes down to the individual, because this is going to be between person and person. When you have a universal statement for your organization, your corporation, your whatever, and that's just the platform, that's what it is, oh my goodness, how many people, not just of your employees or of your membership, get left out, but of the people you are touting to serve.
I think that you're putting your finger on influence and scalability. And the issue becomes, if I can't get a group of like-minded people together and have a stance or a position, then I feel like I don't have any influence. So our response, I can understand what is our response to this, because then I multiply my influence in my mind to a group as opposed to one person. I think we are so against one person having an opinion and ruling anything these days that we try to go for consensus where sometimes consensus is not possible or doesn't make sense. But consensus is a great rule if you can do it. The old saying of, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with others. If you want to go far, then you've got to kind of gather some other people on the way to the king, so to speak, to have the right influence. And so there's the dichotomy. How can I compromise on, here's the major objective, the implementation of these things. Part of it I want this, part of it is I want this, but you know what, I'm willing to give this up in order to get the higher goal. What is the higher goal?
Well, yeah, I think that's where the question has to start, right? And can there be consensus that comes about as an objective to meeting that goal? And I think it's going to look really different depending on what company you work for, what group you're affiliated with, what political party you're part of. It's going to look vastly different.
Vastly different. And one group's objectives are going to be totally different than another group's objectives, even with the same implementation of a system or a technology. One group's goal might be, in our case, and what we deal with in the renewable business, one group's might be renewables as the maximum amount of renewables in the energy system. Another group might be resilience. Another group might be full employment, right? And so how can you figure out how to make everybody in the community employed by implementing this technology? Our approach can be, let's implement this one platform, and it could feed and it could serve each of these goals. But if we're trying to go in and say, here's a platform that works for you, and we don't know what those objectives are, we are going to, by definition, be screwing up.
And alienating a whole lot of people along the way.
Potentially.
Yeah. This is a complex topic, but we are just about out of time for today. So I hope that you have been stirred to think a little bit differently, to ask yourself some questions, and potentially look for how you can ask questions of others that you disagree with so that you can genuinely be curious about their position. So until next time, we'll leave you with some food for thought. Thank you so much for being on the Curiosity, Not Judgment platform.
and take care.